New Orleans Saints head coach Kellen Moore is changing the team's future, and he's doing it with common sense. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, I want to tell you about 3 stars of New Orleans Saints training camp so far, one of which being elevated by Brandon Staley, giving the defense a ton of freedom. The other on offense, Rashid Shaheed, is absolutely electrifying because that's how fast he is. And we'll start everything off with Kellen Moore, who might be camp's MVP. Okay, I know he's not a player, but still might be camp's MVP because of the way that he is immediately improving the team's future. We got all that coming up for you on today's show. We appreciate you very much. Whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Get $20 off of your first purchase. New Orleans Saints head coach Kellen Moore has been one of the most impressive parts of New Orleans Saints training camp so far. And you might hear that and go, oh, no, the coach is the highlight. That must mean that the players are doing no, it's not that. It's not that. It's just that there are things that are elevating the players right now, that are benefiting the players right now, and that are overall benefiting the team right now that have happened because of new head coach Kellen Moore. So I want to highlight 3 things in particular that I think have been simply great for New Orleans. The first of which is the new approach to recovery, prehab, rehab. And so this is the idea of being able to not just recover from or rehabilitate injury, but be preemptive about it and make sure that they're not overworking their players, like doing the little things that will keep their players on the field. And so I want to start there because that's one of the things that I think is most important to me, especially going into, and I'm sure to you too, going and coming out of the last few years where the Saints have been marred with injury and they're trying to change all that. Are they going to be able to change it all in one offseason? I don't know. I mean, not likely from a 0 or 100 to a 0 situation, but if they can get it from 100 to 50, then they're still cutting things down. And so there are a couple of things that he's doing in this element that I think are really important. And so first of all, the hire of Ted Rath has already proven to be an outstanding hire. Every player that I talk to loves the Saints' approach to the way that they're doing this. Erik McCoy spoke to us after practice on Sunday, the team's 4th practice before they go into pads. And he mentioned that this was probably around 11:15 Central Time. He mentioned that after practice, the players, instead of going and sitting in a cold room and doing, practice film review and everything like that, they do that a little bit later. But from after practice to about 1:30 p.m., so for a little bit over 2 hours on a day like Sunday's workday, the team has dedicated to player recovery. So you go out there, you slog, you work, you go out there in the heat, you put all this, you put everything out on the field, and then instead of going and sitting, going and trying to find more work or doing something else that's more strenuous, they get to spend that time recovering from the day's work. And this is what I mean by common sense. It feels like that's a big duh moment. Like, oh yeah, of course you would do that. It reminds me of last year when Dennis Allen was fired. Darren Rizzi stepped in to become the Saints head coach, their interim head coach, and he added the activation period where players weren't stretching. I talked to another player about this very recently here over the course of the past few days, and he talked about how players before that were not stretching and were not asked to stretch before practice. They were made to go off to the side and stretch and arrive ready to go. And that's not always the best way to go about things. And so with that, now you look at this where it's on the back end, plus they do all the prehab stuff. So being preventative, being proactive about trying to curb injury early. Some of the ways that they're doing that, they have the RFID chips, which are these little chips that track everything that a player does in their jerseys. They'll count the number of steps. And if you've got too many steps, they'll go to the position coach and say, hey, have them swap out and get the other player some reps. And so they're managing workloads. They're managing and getting ahead of all these things because you don't want to curb injury once you get to it. That's too late. So again, common sense. So I love all of this kind of common sense stuff that the Saints are doing. The other thing that I think has been really good is the amount of, I don't want to call it freedom, but the amount of focus that Kellen Moore puts on every player's strengths. We're seeing each of these young quarterbacks doing designed runs. We're watching Kendre Miller run in between the tackles, Devin Neal run in between the tackles, Alvin Kamara utilized in the passing game, Clyde Edwards-Helaire utilized in the passing game, ran an angle route the other day. Like all of these little things you can already see are allowing these players the opportunity to do what it is that they are best at. And that's always been a part of the narrative around Kellen Moore, but it's different to see it in action, that they're allowing these players to figure out their route trees, figure out who's going to be the option route runners to where, you know, they can run a route, but based on the leverage of the defender, they've got two options to where if the defender's over the top, maybe they do one thing. If the defender gets even with them, they do another thing. If the defender's underneath, then they do a different thing. Like you think about Alvin Kamara and the choice routes that he would run, the option routes out of the backfield, right? Where he would kind of work his way out of the backfield. And then if the defender's leverage was in the middle of the field, then he would work out towards the sideline. If the defender's leverage was to the outside, then he would work towards sort of that angle route with a nice little catch and run opportunity in the middle of the field. Those are the types of things that Kellen Moore is making available to his entire offense. So that's number two. And then the third thing is just the efficiency of practices, making sure like the amount of stuff that Kellen Moore gets done in practice is absolutely insane. There is so much that he gets done. But then the players come to the podiums and they've worked, but they're not overworked. Like they've put in good, reps and they've been on the field. But the way that Kellen Moore kind of cycles through stuff and the speed at which and the pace at which he runs things, he says that he wants his offense to be like the Indiana Pacers from 2024, their ability, or 2025 rather, their ability to kind of push the pace and be this fast-paced offense and all that. They want that for this offense too. That's what Kellen Moore wants for his offense. And so he's already starting that with that working pace in training camp and instituting some up-tempo every now and then to where he's got, I assume, the communication helmet and communication headset and the ability to be able to say, hey, pace, 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 pick it up, pick it up, pick it up. And then the quarterback knows, okay, we're up-tempo. Let's get to the line. Let's go. And then makes the call at the line. Instead of putting everybody up on the huddle, the defense has to just simply respond to that. It's pushing everything, and it's pushing all of it with one goal, which is pace. Pace. And so he's doing all of it in an efficient way that's getting these players 20, 30, well, not 30, but 20 to 15 reps every day when you've got three quarterbacks that you're still cycling through and all that. Like, despite that, these quarterbacks are still getting a load of reps. And so I think that those three things in particular are things that Kellen Moore is doing incredibly well and are part of laying the foundation for what will make this team better in its future. Doesn't necessarily mean 2025, but better in its future. Investment, consideration of the player experience, right? And just simple common sense are making these teams better and making their future better going into 2025 and beyond, right? Multi-year process here. All right, coming up next, Rashid Shaheed is an absolute stud, and I think that he's in for a massive year in 2025. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy football season is right around the corner. It's time to make sure you got all your drafts set up, you got your boards ready, you got your leagues built, all that. And if you're still trying to figure out where you want to do it, there's really only one answer. It's where all the folks are. They're all playing over at Yahoo Fantasy, and you should be too, whether you're a first timer or you're making your millionth league. You're going to get everything you need over at Yahoo Fantasy, whether you want to manage through the browser or through the app, the UI, the interface, all of it fantastic. Great message boards as well, where the trash talk just hits a little bit different. And to celebrate 28 years of fantasy greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is now dropping 28 big new features over 28 days. So giving you more ways to play, more ways to draft, and more ways to win. And it all begins August 4th. So stay tuned and get started by creating or joining a Yahoo Fantasy Football League at yahoofantasy.com/lockedon NFL. That's yahoofantasy.com/lockedon NFL. Let's make this fantasy season the best one yet. All right, family. Rashid Shaheed, New Orleans Saints wide receiver, is in for an electrifying year, as I said earlier. An electrifying year because this guy's speed makes it so that he can fly, but he's not being limited to the deep ball in the way that maybe he has been over the course of the last few years. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here for another episode. Hope that you're enjoying all of the training camp coverage from our Walk to the Car series that we're doing on social media and, of course, on Yahoo Shorts, to our daily coverage here on the show, our live shows, the Saint Squad, all that. Thank you very much for being here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Super helpful just in support as we go through. We're closing in on 30,000 subscribers on YouTube. When I first started hosting this podcast, I was shocked when I had 300 listeners the first time, and now here we are with this. It's absolutely incredible. So thank you for all the support. Rashid Shaheed is in for a big time year here in 2025. You know, in our Saints Squad show, we have former New Orleans Saints wide receiver Lance Moore, Saints legend Lance Moore, Super Bowl winning wide receiver Lance Moore. Yeah, that one. He's really cool. And he talked about how like his bold prediction for the season was that two wide receivers, Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, would be over 1,000 yards in 2025. And it, you know, it kind of got written off as like, you're a wide receiver. You're picking the wide receiver thing, blah, 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 blah. But really, like, the more that I look at these guys, like, it doesn't feel that crazy. It really doesn't. Like, Chris Olave wants more downfield opportunities. Rashid Shaheed is getting more short and intermediate opportunities in addition to his downfield opportunities. And so with him getting more short and intermediate opportunities, somebody's got to run those deep patterns, and that can be and would be Chris Olave in most cases. And so the idea that both of these guys could have major years in 2025 should not be something that we just like shake a stick at and move on. This is something that could absolutely happen, that both of these guys have big years. And Rashid Shaheed in particular is somebody that I think is going to be in for a massive year in 2025. Will that mean 1,000 yards receiving? It doesn't necessarily have to. It could be 700, 800 yards, but he's going to be somebody that's going to be a little bit more of a focal point in this offense from the looks of things that we've seen so far in training camp. He's going to be able to be on the field a lot. He's added like 10 pounds of muscle over the course of this offseason, says that he wants his target weight of playing in 2025 is around 190 pounds, which would be the heaviest that he's played. But you're not seeing him lose any of that speed at all in the process. This guy is still fast as all get out. He is somebody that absolutely has that electrifying speed. Remember, we thought maybe he might, we were kind of curious, like, is he going to be able to hold on to that after undergoing the knee procedures and things like that, the knee surgery into the season last year? And there has been nothing short of positivity around Rashid Shaheed from being at camp during OTAs when we thought that maybe he wouldn't be, to running these deep patterns during OTAs and mandatory minicamps, to now being involved in the short and intermediate area, and yes, still participating as a returner so far throughout camp as well. Like, Rashid Shaheed is in for a big role in 2025, bigger role in 2025, right? Like, he was already one of the top 2 wide receivers on the team and one of the top 3 wide receivers of the team going into 2025 for certain. And I would still call him going into 2025 one of the top 2 wide receivers for this team. And so now what you're looking at is, how does his role expand? And so he's expanding his route tree. I talked earlier about how Kellen Moore is doing some of these things to where, like, let's find out who can be the player that runs, the players, plural, that can run the choice routes, that can run some of the option routes, that can expand their route tree, things like that. When I spoke with Coach Dub, Keith Williams, the New Orleans Saints wide receivers coach, he told me this offseason that they were players that, you know, maybe the roles look a lot different, not because they're going to be more involved or less involved, but simply because the route tree, they're going to find guys that maybe have the ability to run something that they haven't been running in the offense before, and then teach them to run that thing by simply knowing and seeing and diagnosing, basically, that they feel that they can have that player run that, and then expanding what it is then that player's footprint ends up being in the offense. And Rashid Shaheed is going to be one of those players. We've already started to see it. How's the slant on Friday? Took a slant to the house from Spencer Rattler, quick throw to the right side. Julian Blackmon, the young safety, dove to try to make a play on it. Couldn't make the play on it. Rashid Shaheed gets the catch, and because Julian Blackmon's on the ground, Rashid Shaheed's got nothing but open grass out in front of him. Bam, took off. He was gone. absolutely gone. And no one was going to catch him, even in a live game situation. You know why? Because he's electrifying. He's fast. And so with all of that added to, or adding all of those additional opportunities rather to the skill set that you already know he has, which is this incredibly fast, quick, ridiculously talented, explosive player. Now you're putting the ball in his hands in more situations that can be advantageous for him. You're putting the ball in his hands in space. One of the things that I cannot wait to see him run, along with guys like Juwan Johnson and Chris Olave, are going to be all these crossing patterns that Kellen Moore loves to use in his offense. We're already seeing it. Like, you can see the highlights that the Saints share, like on YouTube and on their social media and stuff like that. They allow us now to film a whole bunch of practice, so you can find film from and tape, and not tape, but you can find, cell phone video and all this other stuff from practices now in a Saints practice. And another way that Kellen Moore has made the experience even better for the fans too. The guy's doing a have lunch with Kellen Moore after practice sweepstakes. I mean, come on, like this is awesome. And so anyway, back to Rashid Shaheed. With Shaheed, like, you can see all of those crossing patterns that Kellen Moore is implementing into the offense. And you saw him last year, unfortunately for you, unfortunately for all of us, with the big Dallas Goedert touchdown at the end of the Eagles game and all that kind of stuff. Like, those crossing patterns are so important. But one of the things that makes those crossing patterns so ridiculously effective is the ability to be able to work laterally with speed. And that's where Rashid Shaheed separates himself, because he's got speed in droves. And now all of a sudden he's working laterally, and you're forcing defenders to chase you in that case, or you're moving in and out of zones if you're going up against zone defense, because you're not working vertically, you're working horizontally, you're working laterally across the field, which means you're coming into this corner's zone. And then as you're out of that corner zone, there's a gap before you're in the linebacker zone. And then maybe you get into the next linebacker zone or a dropping safety zone, but there's a gap in between that. And so it just opens up all of these opportunities for you to find little pockets where you can maybe bend that route a little bit further upfield so that you hit the open field, right? And give that quarterback a spot to throw to over near the sideline, all that. Those are the types of little bitty details that Kellen Moore brings to the team that Rashid Shaheed can take advantage of, that will take advantage of the talents of a Chris Olave and a Juwan Johnson, a Brandon Cooks, and all these others. This is a very good setup for Rashid Shaheed. And what Rashid Shaheed is doing, and the way that he approached this offseason, the way that he tackled all that, the way that he has been impactful already throughout training camp, OTAs, and all that other stuff, it's just setting him up for a massive 2025. And I know what you're thinking. Yeah, he's got to stay healthy. That is the case for every player in the NFL. That is the qualifier for everything that we all say as analysts and beat writers and journalists and all that other stuff. All of it is caveated with if they stay healthy. That's always true. But if he can, Rashid Shaheed is in for a massive 2025 season. And I can't wait to see it. I don't know you can either. Coming up next, let's take a look at Brandon Staley and what it is that he's doing over on the defensive side that's making things a lot better for those defensive players that are looking to stand out. We got that coming up for you next. We continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. We've all been there. You wanted tickets for an event. You didn't really remember when it was going to be. Then all of a sudden you did remember, but it's last minute because it's later on tonight. And you start calling people, hey, did you get tickets? Hey, did you get tickets? Hey, did you get tickets? And then you start checking all the different ticket providers. And the tickets are all crazy expensive and everything. That's why I want you to go ahead and download the Game Time app now. Save yourself all of that stress, confusion, and instead buy into the transparency that comes with the Game Time app. So even if you're buying very close to the event's beginning, sometimes tickets get even cheaper at that time. And they've got other great deals too, zone deals where they'll pick the seats for you, so much more. You can find it all with the Game Time app, where you can take all the guesswork out of buying tickets today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. That's terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation defensive coordinator Brandon Staley is given a lot of freedom and a lot of options to his players, and that's helping a lot of these veterans in particular really stand out over the course of training camp. I know I said I was going to give you 3 standouts, but we always do a little bit of land yap And so we're going to talk about a couple of different players here. So I'll start off here with the impact on Justin Reid. We highlighted this in a couple of episodes ago, but I know not everybody has time to watch every episode, especially when I'm doing 2 shows a day and everything. So I wanted to quickly revisit this. But Justin Reid is somebody that's going to see a massive amount of responsibility in this defense. Everything from his play individually to also potentially, depending upon what it is that he sees from the opposing offense, he can choose to send a linebacker on a blitz. He can choose to send a corner on the blitz. Like, he kind of has the ability to manipulate the entire back 7 to a certain extent. It sounds like he's going to play a little bit further down, like be a little bit a guy that's going to play a little bit more of the kind of like crash down near the line of scrimmage type player. And then they're finding the guy that's going to play deep, which opens up more for Julian Blackmon. That would put Jordan Howden right where he's comfortable. That would put Jonas Sanker in a very comfortable position as well. And so there are kind of these 3 players now that have this opportunity because of what Brandon Staley is providing them to really operate at their best. And Jonas Sanker becomes really interesting because if Jonas Sanker is ever needed in the slot, he can do that. If he's ever needed in place of somebody that can play down in the box, he can do that. So there's a lot of those other players, or a lot of those other spots rather, where Jonas can be impactful. And I think you see the same thing from Julian Blackmon as well, who has in his history playing in the slot, playing deep, playing in the box, all that. But Kellen Moore did say that he sees him a little bit more as a deep safety. So him playing that deep safety role and Justin Reid playing that down in the box type role, getting his hands dirty, but also kind of the cerebral pre-snap role of getting everybody in place and changing responsibilities and working off of what's being seen on the defense and kind of or seen by the offense and being the quarterback of the defense, I think is a really, really advantageous place for him to be. Chase Young told us on Sunday that they actually have the choice whether or not they want to stand up or put their hand in the dirt. And I thought that was massively interesting because should the defensive ends get to the line of scrimmage and be in that wide 9 formation. So remember, every gap where you can line up on the defensive line has a number. 0 is right over the center. 1 is in between the guard and tackle going either direction. 2I, 2, like all this other stuff. So there's a lot of these little technique positions where you'll see different players line up. And wide 9 is the furthest outside alignment. That would be if you've got your offensive line, you can envision like tackle to tackle, but then on one side there's a tight end. You're outside of that tight end. Like, you're all the way out there. And so I think that is something that puts these players in position to be able to have their heads up and see how things are developing in the backfield. That's one thing. Number 2, allows them to be able to be on the outside without getting bumped inside by a tight end or something like that, which then loses contain on mobile quarterbacks. There's a little thing for you. That ends up putting these defensive ends in position to maybe contain those mobile quarterbacks a little bit. And then finally, the ability to be able to choose. I want to stand up based against this. I want to put my hand in the dirt against this, and giving them the freedom to be able to do that. Because honestly, standing up gives you a chance to be able to see a little bit of how things are developing, a little bit more awareness of the play and what the play flow is and what happens after the snap, all those other things. But then also putting your hand in the dirt, some players feel more comfortable with their quote unquote get off when it comes to that, which is how quickly you can get off of the line of scrimmage and cross the line of scrimmage from the defensive line. And so if you're going to be able to do that faster with a hand in the dirt, then you might opt to do that against a certain look, but then against other looks, and knowing that, hey, this is a formation and a look that they like to give when they run like a QB sweep, or they do a toss to the outside or something like that. Maybe you want your head up, and so maybe you want to be standing up in those situations. And so again, Brandon Staley delivering freedom, delivering nuance, delivering choice to his defense elevates yet another player in that situation. So I think that's another place where you certainly see him have a major impact on how things can be kind of molded to fit what the opposing offense is doing. This is something that honestly kind of got to the point where it was driving me a little nuts in evaluating like Dennis Allen's defense. Dennis Allen's defense was so rigid, and I'm going to say stubborn, but I don't mean stubborn in a bad way. I just mean that like this is what they do, and they do this, and this is what they're going to do no matter what the opposing offense does. And so eventually teams have a Kellen Moore who understand that your defense struggles against crossing routes. And so at the biggest moment of a game, he's going to call up one of those crossing routes. And he knows that there are times to where, because of the defensive system that you play and that press coverage, that physical nature, that sometimes your players have a little bit of trouble operating in the tunnels, which is like making sure that like somebody's in the high, somebody's in the low, somebody's in the mid without running into one another. And then he makes your players run into one another in a key moment in the game. All of those things don't happen by accident. That's how opposing offenses get ready for teams that struggle against things and don't change the way, and the system doesn't change around what it is that they're struggling against. That's where Brandon Staley is so different. He's allowing these players who are actually on the field to look at the opposing offense, see what it is that they're doing, see the way that they're lined up, see what the spacing looks like. What's the split for the offensive line? How far outside is the tackle from the guard? Or detached is the tackle from the guard? Where's the tight end? Is it a 3-by-1 where there's 3 receivers on one side, 1 receiver on the other side? Is it 2-by-2? How many players are in the backfield? And then understand how each team has little signifiers of what they like to do in any of those looks that I just kind of rattled off, and then adjust to that in the moment. And so you're looking at game planning, but you're also looking at game changing, right? And so that's one of the things that I think is really elevating where the Saints are right now. Does it mean they're going to be a playoff team in 2025? No, but these are all good things. These are new things and new approaches. At least the Saints are changing some stuff up. 9 p.m. later on tonight, the Squad Show, giving you everything you need to know from training camp practices today. We appreciate you very much for making us a party day part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up, let me know what the family's doing, how you living, let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you.